I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House and to begin on behalf of the Labour Party to express my enormous sympathy to all of those who have been affected by the COVID-19, the over 1,800 people who have so sadly died, and to their families and loved ones, and to the many who continue to suffer, who've had COVID, who are suffering still the after effects of what's been referred to as long COVID. And of course also to express my admiration and solidarity with all our frontline workers. We all recognise the enormous public health threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and in Labour we have offered throughout the last few months, we have offered constructive opposition. We did support the emergency legislation that we're debating today back in March, but we did also table amendments seeking to secure a sunset clause. We were glad to see that sunset clause was inserted in the legislation, and at this point, Minister, we cannot support the extension that is proposed for 7 months. We have not been given adequate time to scrutinise these motions, or indeed the basis for them. We saw the regulations that were signed by the Minister at 10 to midnight last night, SI 448 of 2020, detailed regulations containing extensive penal provisions, draconian powers extended. Those regulations, I know, are only to last until 1st December. But if that's the case, why are we seeking to extend these motions for so long, for 7 months? So I am happy, because of that, to support the Sinn Féin and indeed to second the amendment to shorten the time to February, rather than have this long extension of 7 months to June of next year. There is no difficulty, Minister, with coming back to this House in the interim in February, if indeed a longer extension is needed, and give us time to debate the issue then. But this is entirely inappropriate to be debating this legislation 6 minutes on 2 motions containing extraordinary extensions of powers. Even in a pandemic, Minister, can we not give a little more time for parliamentary scrutiny? The ICCL has rightly criticised the railroading through not only of these motions, but of the other legislation that we are going to be considering under guillotine tomorrow. 4 guillotines tomorrow and 1 today imposed on legislation. A health bill proposed tomorrow which will introduce apparently on-the-spot fines. We're not convinced in Labour that's necessary. There is capacity in the District Court. There are existing procedures through the District Court to enable the implementation of the penal provisions, and we're not convinced of the evidence that these on-the-spot fines are necessary. We have supported the government, as I've said, in order to try and get through this together, but we've tried to do this in a constructive manner. We supported the Living with COVID framework when it was introduced, but we have expressed serious concerns about the way in which it's been implemented, about government communication as to the move between levels, the rapid move from levels 2 or 3 up to level 5, without, it seemed, sufficient consideration of alternatives. And I think we're all very conscious of the massive impact that this week's level 5 restrictions have for so many people, for so many workers, for so many businesses, for so many families. And I think what has been lacking, particularly in the last few weeks, has been any sense of an exit strategy, of a coherent and a planned exit strategy. A point at which we can say we are now at a point where the virus is sufficiently flattened, the curve is sufficiently flattened, that we can move as we were supposed to do, where we can move incrementally between these levels. If we are to live with COVID, then that's what we must do. And I think I think it was clear this week that Taoiseach ruled out the zero COVID strategy. Some very eminent people, scientists and medics, were putting that forward. Clearly, in order to implement a strategy like that, we would have needed a really coherent all-island approach. Unfortunately, that wasn't evident. And clearly, the summer was a missed opportunity where we had brought down levels of infection and brought down the R number to a point at which it would have been containable had we put in place the the contact tracing system that we clearly need, and it broke down so unfortunately at the weekend, and had we put in place a system of rapid testing. And I know Deputy Alan Kelly, my party leader in the Dáil, has put that forward repeatedly as to why we don't have a proper rapid testing system in place, and as to why we don't have a proper contact tracing system. We know that track and test is the only way. If we aren't adopting zero COVID, if we are to be living with COVID, then we must ensure that we have an exit strategy to come out of this level of severe restriction, unsustainable severe restriction. We have to have an exit strategy, a point at which we can say, yes, now it's containable, now we have enough contact tracers in position that we can identify and move and tackle any outbreaks where they occur. That's what we failed to do in the last flattening of the curve. We cannot fail people this time. We've 6 weeks now, and we will work with, from opposition, we will work with all in government and all our frontline workers and all of society to ensure that this does work. But we need to be given a coherent strategy to ensure it works. We've supported you absolutely, Minister, and your government in keeping schools open, schools and childcare. That's hugely significant and important. And we've supported reasonable measures where the evidence is clear. But what we can't support is open-ended extensions for 7 months without adequate time to debate and scrutinise those, and without a clear plan and time frame for coming out of this level of restrictions. I know we'll have the opportunity to speak on the health bill tomorrow, albeit very briefly, because again we have 2.5 hours to pass all stages tomorrow under a guillotine, and that's most unfortunate. But I would say this finally, that through the regulations here, through the extension motions that are being railroaded through today and the bill tomorrow, we're going to see the blunt instrument of the criminal law being used to try and encourage social solidarity. That's not effective. In my view, as a criminal lawyer, that's not the most effective means to tackle COVID, Minister. What we've seen over the last 7 or 8 months is enormous social solidarity, enormous goodwill, enormous efforts and enormous energy put in by so many people to suppress COVID. That's a much better way to build social solidarity, is to ensure we have people with us, we bring people with us, and that we have continued goodwill, not the blunt instrument of the criminal law.